I would now like to call up to the podium a man who, throughout his career, a career that spans radio talk show host, author, participant in enormous charitable ventures, writer, speech maker, has always had as his guiding star the very principles that we talked about. I'd like to bring up our special guest, Michael Reagan. Before I relinquish the podium, which I know some of you think I'm never going to do, but I am quickly, I want to propose a toast. As I mentioned before, tomorrow is the 103rd birthday of our greatest president, President Reagan, or at least the greatest president of my lifetime.
Mine too.
We're about the same age. Okay, but what I want to say about that is, to Ronald Wilson Reagan, a man who spent his entire career dedicated to the proposition that America can and must remain the shining city on a hill. May all of us do what we can in our own way to advance the principles, the American principles, that keep the light of liberty aflame. To Ronald Reagan.
Thank you. Yeah. Frank, I appreciate that. I think my father would have said, well, we're celebrating the 64th anniversary of my 39th birthday. So it's really an honor and privilege for me to be here tonight and be a special guest to see some old friends and meet some new friends. I was telling one of the priests earlier, I said, you know, people always applaud the fact that Ronald Reagan was my father. But my mother, Jane Wyman, was buried as a nun to the third degree. And when you get to heaven, which all of us will, look 2 floors above my dad because he was still buried as a politician. My mother was buried as a nun. I think she's a little bit above him on that. But I praise God every year. And I truly do it I used to do this on my radio show on Roe v. Wade anniversary, that both my parents were not only pro-life, but both my parents were pro-adoption. And that's why I'm here. You know, there's a lot of people, when you look at the Reagan family, it's interesting. There was a woman by the name of, young girl born by the name of Sarah Jane Maysfield, who was not wanted by her parents, and instead of aborting her, they put her on a neighbor's doorstep who brought her in and renamed her Sarah Jane Folks. Then there was another little girl named Ann Robbins, whose father walked out on her the day she was born, and her mother would ultimately get remarried, and she would be adopted by her stepfather. And then there was another little boy born out of wedlock named John L. Flower to a girl who was, in fact, fell in love with a married man, and she came to California and gave birth to that young boy, and he was adopted into a family. And then there was another little girl by the name of Rita Marembe, who was the child of a 13-year-old bush mother in Uganda. And there was a young woman in Uganda during the 1980s sent there by President Reagan to do a women's conference, and fell in love with this little girl she met at this orphanage, and ended up adopting her and bringing that little girl to the United States of America. And that little girl now is 27. Just to give you an idea, you know, when you really think about the effect that you can have in what you do, think how the world would be today if none of those people ever would have existed. The girl that was born is Sarah Jane Maysfield, who became Sarah Jane Folks. I knew her as my mother. You knew her as Jane Wyman. Ann Robbins, you knew her as the First Lady of the United States, married to my father, Ronald Reagan. That's Nancy Reagan. Rita Marembe, you would know as Rita Reagan. She was the daughter of my sister Maureen, who adopted her. And John L. Flower is speaking to you tonight. So think how the world would have been if those people alone had not been allowed to have life here in the United States of America and be able to affect changes that they do as they walk through life each and every day. You know, I was listening to Senator Paul as I came in tonight and listening to what he was talking about taxes and what have you. And, you know, my father, as we celebrate his birthday tomorrow, but remember this is also the 10th anniversary of his passing. It is also the 50th anniversary of his giving the speech, A Time for Choosing, that began this career. You know, as a young 8-year-old boy, my father was one of these people that if you asked him what time it was, he would tell you how the watch was made. And so you kind of couched questions when you asked him a question. And I was born and raised in Beverly Hills, and my parents thought $1 a week was a good allowance. You couldn't keep up with Bob Hope's children on $1 a week. And I knew that, but my father and mother didn't do it. But they were born with a birth defect. It was called the work ethic. And that happened to be because they were born in St. Joe, Missouri, and Illinois, and they didn't meet till they got to California. But I happened to ask my dad for a larger allowance one day riding out to the ranch. I was 8 years old, and my dad, for the next 30 minutes, told me about the tax system in America. And by the end of the day, end of that 30 minutes, I felt so sorry for my father with having to take care of his first wife, my mother, his new wife, Nancy, their new daughter, Patty, my sister, Maureen, myself, of course, the ranch, the horses, the cows, and everybody else. I actually offered back half my allowance to my father. But my father promised me this. He says, if there's a president ever elected gives me a tax break, I'll give you an increase in allowance. And it would be 1964, the Kennedy tax cuts put into effect by Lyndon Johnson, where my dad raised them from $1 to $5. And it created jobs too, especially in an older boy. I was now in high school. But my father, in order to do that when he came to Washington, where we all got an increase in allowance back in the 1980s, he did it by building relationships. And I think you know that in what you do. You don't affect anything unless you build a relationship with people. And from that relationship, how much can grow. And my father knew that in order to get his tax breaks through back in the 1980s, he had to build a relationship. And he had to build a relationship with the other side of the aisle, with a guy named Tip O'Neill. And even though my father knew he had 40 boll weevils, because we called Blue Dog Democrats boll weevils back in those days, he knew he had to get through a guy named Tip O'Neill to get that tax break through, and he invited him up to the White House. And Tip O'Neill went to the White House the next day, would come back. He'd tell his staff he's going to carry the legislation to, in fact, lower taxes in America. His staff looked at him like, what are you thinking? What are you doing? What did the president promise you? And he said, well, the president never spoke about taxes all night long. He said, what did he talk about? What did he promise you? He said, the president of the United States spoke about the greatness of America, the goodness of her people, and how he and I working together can make it better for all. And before I knew it, I was drinking wine with the president. We're telling Irish stories. And today I'm telling you I'm going to carry the legislation. That's what leaders do. They build relationships. And Ronald Reagan began relationships where he found areas of agreement and built that coalition to move forward, not only to win the governorship in California in the 1960s, to win the presidency in the 1980s. He stayed true to himself all the way through. When Ronald Reagan gave you his word, you could take his word and absolutely take it to the bank. And I am blessed that I was lucky enough to be brought into this family at 3 days of age. And just in case you're ever out with me at a bar or someplace else, understand this, I was born German, and 3 days later, I was Irish. So you'll never know what side's going to show up, but wait till midnight. You know, I heard Frank talk a moment about APP and what you're doing and what you need to do. And I want you to think back for a moment to 1976. If not, go catch the speech he gave at the convention where he lost. You know, the easiest speech to give is a speech you've won. You know, no matter what you say, people will applaud because they don't care. But give a speech where you've lost. And Ronald Reagan gave a speech in 1976 in Kansas City when he lost. And he was walking down from the glassed-in booth, and he looked at Nancy and said, I haven't prepared anything. I'm going to say. Nancy put her hand on his arm and said, oh, honey, you'll think of something. And my dad walked out of the podium, given to him by the President of the United States. He addressed he addressed the nation. And what did he talk about? He talked about bold colors. The bold colors of the Republican Party that we just heard this speech, we need to go forward from here with these bold colors and bring it out to the public and really build a coalition and build this party. But he talked about something else. He talked that he had been asked to write a note to be put into a time capsule that would in fact be open on the 300th anniversary of this nation. And he said, what a daunting task to be asked to write a letter to a people who would know everything about us, but we would know nothing of them. He said, what do I write about? Do I write about nuclear proliferation knowing that in fact they'll know in fact if we use those weapons? He says, or do I write about freedom, knowing if we don't make that right decision today, they may very well not enjoy the freedom to even open up the time capsule I'm writing this note into. But he wrote that note, and he put it into a time capsule. It's going to be open on the 300th anniversary of this country. And I know a lot of these events go on, and I speak at a lot of events throughout the country. We're doing a lot with my own little foundation, the Reagan Legacy Foundation. We're opening up a Reagan exhibit at Normandy on June 5th of this year for the 70th anniversary of Day. We're doing a lot. But you know something? We go to these events and we go home and we say that was a great night. We heard Senator Rand Paul spoke, Frank spoke. Gee, Mike Reagan was there, the special guest, and he spoke too. And then we forget about it till the next event. And then we say hello to everybody. We say, wasn't that nice? We said hi. Oh, remember we saw each other back then? Let me challenge you to this. You really want to affect change and move forward? Because let me tell you something. Evil never dies. If you think of evil as termites eating away at the foundation of this nation every single day, we can't just be effective getting together every 2 years or every 4 years and think that's going to change things. We have to be engaged 24/7, 24 hours a day, if indeed we are going to beat back evil. And so here's my challenge to you. If you want to be like Ronald Reagan, you want to be like him, start your own time capsule. Write a note in that time capsule and begin it now. What you are doing in your sphere of influence to guarantee freedom and life and liberty for the next generation. And put that in a time capsule to be opened up on the 300th anniversary of this country. And in there, challenge your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren to keep it going. And tell the story of what a great country this is and what you're doing now to affect that change, to make it a better place for them, and to keep freedom alive and keep freedom growing. People want to have Ronald Reagan back. If you wake up in the morning and you want to be free, if you wake up in the morning and you want to truly fight for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if you truly want that, you don't have to want Ronald Reagan back. All you have to do is look in the mirror because you see Ronald Reagan is alive in you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
I got a song that I sing. I can make.
Ladies and gentlemen, blessed is the Lord, the King of heaven, who brought bread from heaven and water from rocks and raised us up from the dust of the earth, stitched together in our mother's wombs, and brought us all here around the table tonight to enjoy each other's company and to celebrate in this event. And if you would like to participate and continue enjoying each other's company, there's a dinner reception at Morton's across the street. Thank you so much for coming.